Let them manage. A Small Business Guide to People Management, written by Stell. Chapter 9. Managing Employee Behavior. Flexible Working. If your business is manufacturing, only some employees will ever be able to work from home. However, the world economy is moving increasingly away from manual labor, such that many of the tasks that are now performed are done so through a computer. The location of the computer can be in the office, it can be at home, could even be a laptop on a beach. The point is that it literally could be anywhere. What we've learnt as a nation, as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, is that forced working from home was not the productive nightmare that we thought it was going to be. In many cases, productivity actually rose. Staff, who we perhaps assumed couldn't wait to lounge on the sofa and watch Netflix all day, are people that can be trusted to perform without you constantly watching them. So how is this apparent paradox so easily attained? In my world of accountancy, the tasks that my staff have to perform are ones that are, generally speaking, best performed in silence. Concentration is important, and the tasks we deal with are complex. On the other hand, staff need to be able to talk to their colleagues about the solutions to client problems. If they are working from home, they can't do that. But if they are working in a busy, noisy office, their concentration will inevitably suffer. What I have found in my own company is that the best solution is a hybrid mix of working from home and working in the office. Human beings are social creatures, and they need to be with other human beings. So it is important that people do come into the office, but it is also important that they are offered flexible working times. An employee may wish to do 3 half days and 1 full day per week in the office and the rest from home, as an example. As an employer, bearing in mind that you wish to avoid a deserted office, it is better to leave it to them to work it out. If you treat people like grown-ups, surprise, surprise, they behave like grown-ups. Considering the cost of travel and of feeding oneself away from home, switching from full-time in the office to part-time in the office gives an employee an immediate and substantial pay rise. Not only that, but they also won't have to waste 2 to 3 hours a day getting into work time, which is better spent working on your business. How fresh and ready do you think the average employee is after having had to stand on a train nose to nose with a complete stranger for an hour and a half? Flexible working times means that rush hours can be avoided at the beginning and even at the end of the day. This will definitely lead to a fresher and more motivated employee. What I have found is that when employees do want to come into the office, they quite often look forward to it as it now becomes the minority of their 7-day week. There are, of course, as ever, some legal aspects to consider when offering employees the opportunity to work from home. These are: home workers are still entitled to sick pay. In fact, apart from the change in their place of work, the terms and conditions of their employment contract will, in the vast majority of cases, remain the same. Employers have a duty of care to ensure employees are not working more than 48 hours a week on average, unless the employee has specifically opted out of the working time directive. With the switch to home working, there is a possibility some employees will find it hard to switch off. Though very difficult to track accurately, try to look out for signs of overworking, like the time of day employees are sending out emails, etc. Employers are responsible for data security, even if the data is kept at a worker's home. Basic checks should be done to ensure staff are suitable as home workers. At the beginning of 2020, not many of us had heard of Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Their use is now commonplace within most companies. But what some people have started to suggest is that these types of meetings are far more exhausting than face-to-face meetings. The science behind this will develop over time, but what is initially apparent is that the brain has to work much harder in a Zoom meeting than it does in a face-to-face meeting. Partially, this is because you are looking at yourself for some of the time in a Zoom meeting, which of course you would never do in a face-to-face meeting. Also, because you can only see someone's head and shoulders, there is a lot of body language that you cannot see. We know from interpersonal contact that body language does give an indication of many responses, for example, agreement or doubt. Working from home does mean that your team must take more responsibility between them for making sure that some members are physically available in the office. No client likes to be told that the person they are looking for is not in the office today. A good telephone system will enable calls to be sent through to mobile phones as well as other extensions so that a client calling in doesn't necessarily have to know that your member of staff is not physically in the office. My opinion is therefore to treat the people who are working from home as if they were in the office as far as clients are concerned, and to make sure that customers' needs can be met wherever that person physically is. Dealing with the disruptives. The disruptive member of staff can come in many different forms, and as an example, there is the always present type who constantly wants to be seen to be asking questions. They think that this will make them look inquisitive and engaged in your business. The interesting aspect to this behavior for me is that they seem to put all of their energy into asking the question, and when you explain the answer to them, their interest seems to fade. As far as they are concerned, they have achieved their objective in asking the question in the first place. They are not the type of person who wants to gain knowledge. They are people who purely want to make a point to you, their boss. These are also the people that in meetings will say, "Shouldn't we be doing this? Shouldn't we be doing that?" as some kind of general statement of general, non-specific policy for you and the company to consider. This makes them appear intelligent and broad in their thinking, but they only ever ask the questions, and they rarely, if ever, offer the strategy or solution. So, how should you deal with these people? In my opinion, ruthlessly. The reason being is that they will sap your time and energy. It could be that the individual is genuinely curious, and of course, genuine curiosity is something to be admired and developed. They may also want specific answers to specific questions in order to perform their role. Both of these are admirable, but when that person appears to be asking the same questions over and over again, and even after 6 months does not appear to have picked up even the basics of your business, you have to conclude that that person is not listening and their agenda is not aligned to your own. A close eye needs to be kept on these types, and if the behavior persists, you must look for ways of either getting them to change their conduct or get them out of the company. The problem with disruptors is that they can appear to be the brightest person in the room. Sitting next to them may be someone who hardly ever talks, but crucially gets the job done quietly and efficiently. Don't make the mistake of promoting the disruptor over the quiet one, as the disruptor will likely always be trouble. Every time they ask a question, they are pulling in someone else's time, and thereby doubling the overall inactivity by taking up their own time and someone else's. It is important to remember that if you permit such poor behavior, you are effectively promoting it. Another personality type is the stepping stone. This is an individual who is using your company as a stepping stone to bigger things further on. They appear to have a voracious appetite for work. They are bright, great with your clients, great with your team, and they are just altogether fantastic. But be aware that it's highly unlikely you will keep them for long. Wouldn't it be great if your whole team was filled with these people, endlessly ambitious, growing higher and higher and higher? Unless your company can achieve a rapid rate of growth, these individuals will almost certainly outgrow your organization within 2 to 3 years. My advice is, don't fear this. You will get a lot out of them during that time, and they will also help other members of your staff. It is always a temptation to think that they are irreplaceable, but in my view, no one is ever irreplaceable. All you can do is wish these people well, keep in touch with them, and hold them up as an example to others. In conclusion, therefore, there is nothing wrong with your company being seen as a stepping stone to other things. Who would you rather have working for you? Ambitious types or languid dullards? Feedback, negative and positive. Positive feedback is not part of a review, but is the short message delivered ad hoc. I always think email is better for this because it's a permanent record. I think sparingly is best. In contrast, I believe negative feedback should be delivered in a much more extended and detailed way. The negative feedback should first of all outline what the problem is, as you see it, and then go on to provide the solution. Just remember that human beings will require 5 pieces of positive feedback for every 1 piece of negative feedback. There is a helpful acronym WWW.EBI, which stands for What's Working Well, Even Better If. So in other words, the employee you are giving negative feedback to is also told, at the same time, what they are doing right. In British culture, we typically like to lay out negative feedback in the form of helpful advice, i.e., like it's a kind of tip for future success. Other cultures are much more direct and will just simply point out something that is wrong and how it should be corrected. Always make sure that if you are handing out negative feedback, the person that you are addressing it to has the opportunity to come and talk to you if they are unsure about what you are saying. When it comes to giving praise, it is often easy to overlook the person who is a consistently high performer. It feels a little daft to be telling a person every single day, "Oh, that was great, and that was great." It sounds like you are overdoing it, and that person will soon get bored with being told the same thing over and over again. However, it is important that these people are recognized regularly and that you don't take their performance for granted. If you are not careful, you can find that it is always the poor performers who get the congratulations when they do something right, whereas the consistently good performers are ignored. Dealing with negative Nigels. These are the people for whom the glass is always half empty. For these people, there is no solution that cannot be matched with an even bigger problem. Asking them to cheer up is about as useful as asking the rain to stop. My view on such people is that their personality is something you cannot change. Of course, there may be other factors in play here that cannot and should not be discounted, such as personal difficulties and mental health. So, with all things considered, the key thing is, do they perform? If they have a constantly negative attitude but are still performing very well, my suggestion is that they are the sort of person that can be a valuable asset to your team. The fact that they will always see the negatives in everything can, of itself, be very useful. They are like pit canaries in that they will sound the alarm before anyone else realizes the danger. In other words, the fact that they are negative is a possible asset to your team, provided they are not disruptively negative. As ever, the key thing is always performance. Creating the right climate. How do you create a climate? Wouldn't it be great if the sun shone every day? To your staff, to an extent, you are the weather system. If you come into the office in a bad mood, that bad mood will spread. If you are of a sunny and positive disposition, that will also spread. Everyone knows what the ideal climate should be, and that is one where people are, generally speaking, positive about solving problems. They can collaborate freely with their immediate superior, and their views will be respected but challenged. They always know where to go for help, and more importantly, they know what the overall objective of the company is. Employees that work for a boss who puts his or her own lifestyle requirements ahead of the customer's needs, despite the fact that he or she goes on and on about looking after the customer, will very soon lose respect from his or her team. Creating the right climate means empowering your staff to make decisions and take them away from you. If all the decisions require your sign-off, very soon you will be overwhelmed. This is, of course, extremely difficult, but if you get it right, you will develop the right climate. Resolving conflict between colleagues. If your colleague is a fellow football player in a team that is losing to its closest rivals, a raised voice on the field of play can be useful and instructive. In an office environment, however, I would suggest that there is no need whatsoever for a raised voice unless there is an actual risk of physical danger, e.g., a fire. Anyone who raises their voice in an office environment is behaving inappropriately. The reality is that as human beings, we react negatively to such explosions, and we get an adrenaline rush when faced with someone who has raised their voice against us. This is therefore not an environment that is going to be conducive to calm and rational decision-making. Of course, it is important to have passion in your work, but a passionate employee who raises their voice against another colleague is someone adding negativity to an office environment. When two colleagues frequently bicker and argue, as the CEO, you will need to step in. I've been in a situation where there was an extremely combative individual who released their anger and unpleasantness against two other colleagues in the office. It was not, however, that common, and it was never in my presence. This led to me having complaints from the victims, but with me having not witnessed the event, who was I to believe? What I did in this instance was talk to other people in the office who were present whilst this went on, and it wasn't long before I realized what the truth was. I had a meeting with the individual concerned and told her that her behavior was unacceptable, and if she did it one more time, she would get a written warning and a further outburst would lead to her dismissal. All was quiet for a little while until she could not contain herself any longer and duly lost the plot, but, again, when I wasn't in the office. I issued the written warning, calm for a while, and yet again it happened. Inevitably, she had to go. She too realized that she had to go. There are some people in this world who just cannot contain their emotions. They may be the most brilliant and talented people in the world, but you really don't need that level of disruption. Employee conflict is not the same as employee debate. I have seen two employees arguing a point with some passion, but never ever losing their temper with each other and discussing the point at length to try and achieve a solution. I have watched these discussions unfold in front of me, as if I wasn't there. Nothing pleases me more than to see my own employees talking things through at length, with enthusiasm and passion, but crucially, without any negative emotion. Building a high-performance team is a hard thing to do indeed, but it can be done, and I have discovered over the years that there are pitfalls to avoid and opportunities to grasp. Firstly, be aware that age, gender, and race are all irrelevant when building your team. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you want people like you to build this great team. People who think the way you do, act the way you do, talk the way you do. The reality is that you need a diversity of ages, sexes, and races. From that diversity will come a different way of looking at problems. Although you would like your staff to be passionate about their views, a collaborative approach is always going to be more conducive to harmony and, crucially, to gaining positive results instead of a competitive culture. As human beings, we are naturally competitive, but it is better for your staff to reserve that competitive side of their behavior for the firm as a whole rather than their position within the firm. If you can combine all of those competitive spirits into a common purpose of putting your clients' needs first, then a great team ethos can be developed. If everybody in the team believes that they are all going in the same direction and have the same purpose, there is a synergistic result. In a positive team environment, everybody on the team has an opportunity to express their opinions. It is a temptation to just listen to the well-spoken positive types, but as previously mentioned in this book, the quietly or rarely spoken individuals need to be listened to, as quite often their insight can be invaluable. There will always be somebody on the team who wants to hog the limelight by talking over their colleagues and generally being too loud. Their natural effervescence is, of course, useful, but you can dial down their behavior by giving a little bit more prominence to the quietly spoken individuals. Working with people from different cultures means giving people space to celebrate their own culture. One obvious example of this is with religious festivities. Be sure that you recognize an individual's right to celebrate their own religious days, and also remember that for some, you will need to recognize their right to pray. Wherever possible, you should also provide space for this. Teams work better when all members of the team are seen to be treated equally and with respect. Managing employees' reaction to change. Much as some of us would like to think otherwise, change is constant. The phrase, "if it ain't broke, why fix it?" assumes the world never changes. That is simply not the case. In reality, constant change means there is a need for constant adapting. Some people relish a change and see it as an opportunity, whilst other people may fear it. Your job as leader is to ensure that your staff can cope with any changes that will inevitably come over time. As the team leader, it is no good just telling your people, things are going to change and this is what's going to happen. You need to sell to them the reasons behind the change. This means telling people what the consequences are of not changing and what opportunities the change will present to everybody. This selling process, because that is what it is, should be undertaken sometime in advance of the change taking place. My preference is to do it in writing and give members of staff time to come and see you individually to talk through the impact. What everybody wants to know, of course, is what's in it for them, what are the consequences for them, what are the new opportunities that would be presented by the change. One of the key aspects in the communication of potential change is that you must be clear that there is no alternative. If there is resistance from any particular members of staff, those members of staff must be told that the direction of the company is now set, and if that is not in the direction in which they want to go in, they must make their decisions accordingly. If the implementation of the change is planned sufficiently in advance, those who don't want to go along with it will have time to make alternative plans. The follow-up to the change is for you to repeat the plan and the implementation of the plan at staff meetings. The reality is that people will forget what they have been told, and they will need to be reminded on a frequent basis. Furthermore, staff meetings will enable these matters to be discussed openly, and the staff are able to put you on the spot for you to answer all their questions. One of the key objections to change is often lack of resources. People will say, "How can we do such and such? We haven't got the necessary IT or software to make that happen." It is always better to anticipate those objections in advance and to be able to provide the answers. You will need to know where the IT and software is going to come from and where extra resources are going to be found. Communicate, communicate, communicate. When it comes to management change, there is no substitute for frequent communication. That communication should always be delivered in a positive way. It is inevitable that some members of staff will be more enthusiastic about the possibilities than others. If it is possible to appoint people who can assist in implementing the change, then clearly the ones you should be selecting are the enthusiastic ones. They are also in a position to help you sell the idea of the changes to the more reluctant staff. Managing creativity within the team. If you think that you, as the owner and leader of this company, know everything, then you are wrong. Hopefully your team will be made up of young people, old people, and people from different ethnicities. They will have a different way of viewing the challenges that you face, and will therefore have different solutions, particularly if they are younger and more knowledgeable around the technology than you are. The key thing is to be open to new ideas at all times. If you give the impression that you don't want to change your ways, or that the way things are is just fine, then your team will very quickly stop feeding you new ideas. New ideas should ideally come to you in the form of a verbal discussion initially, to be followed up by the proposal in writing. Any proposal should be brief. The next stage is for you to think about that carefully, but you must ensure that you have a full discussion with the individual who has made the suggestion, and if you genuinely think it is not going to work, you need to tell them why. But be sure to encourage them, offer your gratitude, and suggest some potential alternatives. Maybe suggest that they go away and think about it, or talk to some other members of the team, and come up with a plan that is different and even better in a number of ways that you will then describe. If you have ambitious people working for you, they will have a constant flow of ideas, and you would be a fool to ignore that treasure trove coming your way. The end. The book Let Them Manage was written to put the responsibility back on business owners to look after the people working for them and to have an understanding of how their teams are being built. This does not negate the need to have a suitable HR function if your organization was large enough, but those departments should only be used when it is relevant to do so. There are times when you will find the resources of energy and time will prevent your involvement, but it does not remove your responsibility. If you are looking for assistance in managing your personnel and making sure all the legalities are accounted for, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Otherwise, all there is to say is, "I'll let you manage." Robert Stell.